Kala still remembers the way the sun dipped behind the hills of Murebo as she and Darren walked up to his family's estate, her arms full of gelori pastries she'd baked the night before. She told herself this visit would finally bring peace, that Madame Ovia would see she meant well. But the moment they stepped inside, she felt the chill in the room settle on her skin. Every smile at dinner looked tight, every comment carried a sting, and she kept laughing softly just to hold herself together. Darren squeezed her hand under the table, but he didn't say much, and that silence cut more than the whispers floating around her. Later that night, when Madame Ovia burst at her over a harmless question about an old photo, Kala froze. The whole table did. She walked out slowly, as if any sudden movement would shatter what was left of her courage. Outside, the garden air felt heavy, and she saw Madame Ovia arguing with Uncle Rico in sharp whispers, their shadows jumping against the balcony light. By morning, even the birds around the estate sounded muted. Then the lawyer arrived for the will reading, and everything turned. As soon as Kala's name appeared in the letter, the whole room seemed to tilt. The late Mr. Sarrow wrote that she was the one who had cared for him, the one who saved the family business without ever taking credit. Madame Ovia went pale. Kala didn't say much. She simply stood, walked outside, and let the warm Murebo sunlight rest on her face, feeling something inside her finally settle. Kala can still feel the weight of that evening every time she thinks about Murebo. The sky outside the estate had turned a soft orange, the kind that usually brings calm, but inside the dining hall the air felt tight, like everyone had agreed to smile only with their teeth. The long wooden table was polished so brightly she could see her own nervous reflection in it. She tried to laugh a little as she sat down, hoping to settle her heartbeat, but the moment Madame Ovia's eyes landed on her, everything inside her went still. The woman watched her the way people watch a fragile cup on the edge of a shelf, waiting for it to fall. At first the comments were small, almost gentle, wrapped in polite tones. Someone joked about how simple life in Gelori must be. Another asked if she ever planned to find a proper job. Someone else wondered aloud if her family knew how to behave at formal events. Kala smiled through all of it, taking tiny sips of water, feeling her hands warm from embarrassment. She kept reminding herself she was here to make peace, not trouble. Darren sat beside her, and every now and then he squeezed her hand under the table, but he didn't speak up, and she wished he would at least once. The silence became its own kind of cut. She tried to find comfort in the smell of roasted acai leaves drifting from the kitchen, something familiar and sweet, but even that couldn't soften the tension. Madame Ovia kept asking pointed questions, always with that calm voice that felt sharpened just for her. "Kala dear, is this how things are done in Gelori? Kala, did your parents teach you that?" Tiny blades, each one landing before she even saw it coming. At one point, Kala dropped her fork, and the sound echoed through the room louder than it should have. She bent to pick it up, forcing out a small laugh, but her cheeks burned. A cousin across the table exchanged a quick glance with an aunt, and Kala caught it. That tiny moment made her chest tighten because it told her she wasn't imagining anything. Someone asked her about her work again, in that tone that pretends to be curious but hides a challenge underneath. She answered calmly, careful with her words, still hoping she could show them she meant no harm. But the more she tried, the more the room pulled away from her, like she was an outsider knocking on a door that no one had any intention of opening. Even the candles flickered strangely, as if the heat from the arguments waiting in the air was stronger than the flames. The only sound that ever felt kind came from Darren's breath beside her, but even that wasn't enough to steady her. She noticed how stiff his shoulders were, how he kept his eyes on his plate, and a quiet ache settled in her chest. She wanted to reach out to him, to whisper something light that would make them both laugh, but she knew if she tried, her voice might shake. So she kept eating slowly, tasting nothing, smiling at comments that were never meant to be friendly, telling herself she just had to survive the night. Yet deep inside, a small voice whispered that something was shifting, something she wouldn't be able to ignore much longer. even if she wanted to. Kala remembers how the night seemed to be holding its breath by the time dinner was almost over. She was trying so hard to stay steady, to ignore the sharp comments floating around the table like tiny darts, and she kept telling herself that if she stayed calm long enough, something would soften. When she finally stood to stretch her legs, she wandered toward a wall filled with framed memories. Weddings, graduations, baby photos, old black and white portraits of people who carried the family name long before she ever knew Darren. One picture caught her eye, a warm image of a young man laughing beside an older gentleman on a wide field in Lufera. She smiled a little, thinking it might be a story worth hearing, and asked gently, "Who is this?" The question floated lightly into the air, but the reaction came down like thunder. Madame Ovia pushed her chair back so sharply it scraped the floor. She rose with a face so cold it made Kala's stomach drop. She accused Kala of prying, of pretending to care, of trying to force her way into a family that wasn't hers. Her voice kept rising, shaking the plates on the table, until she finally shouted that Kala didn't belong in this house or in the Murebo family at all. The room froze. No one moved. Even the candles seemed to stand still. Kala felt heat climb behind her eyes, but she didn't let a single tear fall. Her body stayed perfectly still, even though her heart felt like it had taken a blow she couldn't defend. Darren's chair creaked as if he wanted to stand, but he stayed seated, and that silence felt louder than his mother's shouting. Kala forced herself to breathe slowly, staring at the photo she had asked about, trying to anchor herself to something gentle. She heard someone cough nervously, someone else whisper her name, but the world around her sounded muffled, like she was underwater. She sat back down at the table with her hands carefully folded, because she was afraid that if she moved even an inch, her whole body would start shaking. She could feel everyone watching her, waiting to see if she would break or fight back. But she didn't do either. She simply looked at Madame Ovia with tired eyes and wondered how a simple question about a happy picture had turned into a storm. The weight of the moment pressed so heavily on her chest that she could barely swallow. She thought of Jelori, of her mother's gentle hands, of the quiet way her father used to say her name, and she wished she could borrow their strength for just 1 minute. Darren finally whispered, "Kala, I'm sorry," but the words were too soft, too late, and they drifted away before they could reach her. For a long moment the room remained painfully still, everyone pretending to breathe normally even though the night had already snapped in two. And as Kala sat there, stunned by the cruelty she never saw coming, she felt something inside her shift in a way she knew would change everything that came after. Kala steps out of the dining hall as if the walls themselves are pushing her away. The night air in Murebo should have felt cool, maybe even comforting after everything that happened, but instead it feels heavy, like the sky is holding onto her shoulders. She stands on the stone path and tries to breathe slowly, counting in her head the way her mother taught her when she was small. But every breath brings back Madame Ovia's voice, sharp and loud, and Kala keeps replaying the moment until her chest tightens again. Darren hurries after her, his footsteps uneven, his face full of embarrassment he doesn't know how to hide. He reaches for her arm, stopping just short of touching her, as if even that feels risky. He keeps saying he's sorry, saying his mother has always been protective, saying she didn't mean it like that. Each sentence sounds thin, like paper trying to cover a crack in the ground. Kala forces a small laugh, more out of tiredness than humor, and tells him she just needs a minute. She can see the helplessness in his eyes, and for a moment she wonders if he's hurting as much as she is, or if he's simply afraid of what comes next. She walks toward the garden, letting the crunch of gravel under her sandals anchor her. The lantern lights along the pathway cast soft gold circles on the ground, and the flowers around her sway as if whispering secrets to the wind. She tries to let the quiet soothe her, but her mind is still spinning, jumping between shame, confusion, and something that feels close to anger. She pauses near a cluster of tall Mbira lilies, touches one lightly, and sighs. That's when she hears it, muffled voices above her. She looks up and sees Madame Ovia on the balcony with Uncle Limo, both of them half hidden behind tall pillars. Their faces are tense, their hands slicing the air in sharp motions. At first Kala thinks it's about her, maybe another round of complaints, but something in their whispers feels different, more frantic than angry. Limo keeps shaking his head, and Ovia keeps pressing something into his hand, something small that glints under the lantern light. Kala steps back slowly, her heart beating faster now for a different reason. She strains to catch a word, even a phrase, but all she hears is a hurried, "Not now," and a low warning she can't make sense of. She feels a strange chill climb her spine, the kind that comes when your body realizes something before your mind does. For a long moment she stands there, hidden by the lilies, watching them argue as if the whole world is closing in around them. Then Madame Ovia abruptly turns toward the garden, and Kala ducks behind the flowers, holding her breath until the footsteps fade. When she stands again, the night feels even heavier than before, as if she has stepped into a story she wasn't meant to see. She wraps her arms around herself and keeps walking deeper into the garden, trying to understand whether she's more hurt by the shout at dinner or more shaken by the secret she has just stumbled across without meaning to. By morning, the estate feels like it has pulled itself tight overnight, as if every wall has learned how to hold a grudge. Kala wakes to the sound of quiet footsteps in the hallway, the kind people make when they don't want to be caught listening at doors. She sits up slowly, her body still carrying the ache of the night before, and for a moment she considers telling Darren she wants to go home to Jalori and never look back. When she steps into the corridor, Madame Ovia turns the opposite direction so quickly it looks almost rehearsed. No greeting, no glance, not even the cold smile she wore the day before. The silence feels sharper than the shouting. At breakfast, only a few family members appear, and even they speak in low murmurs, looking at Kala the way people look at a storm they hope will pass without touching them. Someone drops a spoon, and the tiny sound makes everyone jump a little. Darren sits beside her and whispers that maybe they should leave soon, maybe they should pack before anything else goes wrong. His voice carries a nervous hope, but before Kala can answer, a deep knock echoes through the hall. The lawyer, Mr. Aboni, has arrived. He removes his hat carefully, greeting everyone with the calm confidence of a man who doesn't bend to family politics. He announces that the reading of the late Mr. Sarrows must happen that morning, as scheduled. The air shifts immediately. A few aunts straighten their backs, cousins stop whispering, and even Madame Ovia reappears with a stiff look, as if she's been summoned by duty rather than desire. Kala watches all of this quietly, unsure if she should follow into the sitting room or slip away to the garden and wait for Darren to find her later. But something in her stomach twists, the same feeling she had last night when she saw Ovia and Uncle Limo arguing on the balcony. It's a quiet warning, a soft push that tells her she shouldn't leave yet. So she stays seated as everyone gathers, her hands folded neatly in her lap even though they feel a little shaky. Darren brushes his thumb against her wrist and whispers, "You don't have to be here." But she shakes her head, not out of courage, but out of something deeper, something closer to instinct. When they move into the sitting room, she notices how the portraits on the wall seem to watch the family take their seats. The curtains sway gently, even though the windows are closed. Every detail feels heightened, as if the house itself is holding its breath. Kala chooses a quiet corner, hoping not to draw attention, but she can feel the eyes of several relatives drifting toward her, full of questions, judgments, maybe even fear. She doesn't understand any of it yet. All she knows is that her heart is beating too fast and that her legs feel anchored to the floor. Something is coming. She can feel it. And though part of her wants to run, a stronger part refuses to move until she finally understands why this house, this family, this entire trip has felt like standing just a little too close to a truth no one wants to speak. The room feels tight from the moment everyone sits down, as if the chairs were pushed too close together on purpose. Kala stays near the edge of the circle, hoping to disappear into the cushions. Mr. Aboni opens his folder with slow, careful hands, and the rustle of paper sounds louder than anyone expects. He begins with the easy parts, listing land in Zuro, old buildings in central Murebo, shares in companies that have been in the family for generations. People nod along, already guessing who will receive what. Kala keeps her eyes on her lap, tracing a small thread on her dress to steady her nerves. Then the lawyer pauses. He clears his throat, glances at the paper again, and when he speaks next, his voice lands in the room like a stone dropped into still water. The late Mr. Sarrow writes that Kala is to receive a personal inheritance, not because she married into the family, but because she was the only one who cared for him during his illness. The words float there, filling every corner of the room. Someone gasps. Someone else mutters a curse under their breath. Kala lifts her head slowly, stunned. She didn't even know he had written anything like that. She remembers sitting beside him in the Lufra clinic, bringing him homemade soup, listening to his quiet stories, never imagining he would tell the world. Madame Ovia's face drains as if someone pulled all the color from her at once. She grips the arm of her chair so tightly her knuckles turn white. Before anyone can speak, Mr. Aboni continues, reading a line that slices the room open. Mr. Sarrow explains that Madame Ovia hid the truth about their failing finances for years, and that Kala was the one who saved the family business through the advice she quietly gave him, help she never took credit for. The silence that follows feels deep enough to swallow the floor. Uncles stare at each other. Aunts whisper in disbelief. Cousins shift uncomfortably, avoiding Kala's eyes. Kala feels her heart thudding against her ribs, not from pride, but from shock and a trembling sadness she can't quite name. She had never expected thanks, never wanted to hold anything over anyone. She had only wanted peace. Darren turns toward her slowly, his expression breaking open, a mix of guilt and love and the kind of realization that shakes a person from the inside. He whispers her name like it's a fragile truth he almost lost. Madame Ovia tries to speak, but her voice cracks. She stands halfway, then sits again as if the weight of her own choices has settled on her shoulders at last. Kala watches her with a softness she doesn't fully understand, a softness that surprises even her. She isn't angry. She isn't triumphant. She is simply tired. The lawyer folds the papers and looks around the room, waiting for anyone to respond. No one does. Not at first. It feels like the whole family is seeing Kala clearly for the first time, realizing how much she gave, how much she endured, how deeply they misjudged her. And in that stillness, Kala finally feels something shift inside her, not a victory, but a quiet recognition of her own worth, something she had forgotten she carried all along. The moment Mr. Aboni turns the page, the air in the sitting room shifts again, almost like the walls lean in to listen. Kala feels her heartbeat in her throat, steady but heavy, as if her own body is bracing for something it already senses. The lawyer reads the next lines with a slow, careful voice, and each word seems to echo before it settles. The late Mr. Sarrow explains that Madame Ovia didn't try to push Kala out of the family because she disliked her, but because she feared Kala knew too much about the estate's real condition. He writes plainly that years ago, when the family business was collapsing from debts and hidden losses, Kala was the one who guided him through the hardest decisions. Her advice saved everything. Her quiet warnings kept them afloat. Her kindness, which they had dismissed, turned out to be the backbone of their survival. For a moment no one speaks. The room feels suspended, like time itself isn't sure how to move on. Then soft murmurs break out, spreading through the family in waves. Some look confused, others embarrassed, a few even ashamed. Kala sits very still, her eyes lowered, her hands linked tightly, not wanting to draw attention even now. Darren turns toward her slowly, and his expression makes her chest ache. His eyes shine with heartbreak, not because he doubted her, but because he never realized how much she carried alone. He whispers her name, and this time she hears everything inside it: apology, love, regret, and disbelief all tangled together. Madame Ovia tries to sit straighter, her chin trembling. She opens her mouth to speak, but the first sound that comes out is thin and shaky. She tries again, explaining that she only wanted to protect the family, that she feared Kala's influence, that she worried someone from outside would take over what she had spent her life defending. But her voice keeps cracking as if each word fights her. The more she speaks, the more her mask slips. She wipes her eyes once quickly like she hopes no one sees, but everyone sees. For the first time since Kala entered the estate, the family looks at Madame Ovia the way they once looked at Kala, searching for the truth beneath her calm expression. Uncle Limo rubs his forehead, muttering that none of this makes sense. Aunt Fina shakes her head slowly, whispering that they all owe Kala more than they ever realized. Even the younger cousins stare at her with wide eyes, shocked that the woman they teased so easily once held their future together without saying a word. Kala feels her chest warm and tighten all at once. She isn't angry. She isn't proud. She is simply overwhelmed by the weight of everything she never expected to be revealed. She looks up finally, meeting Darren's gaze, and something inside her shifts with a soft, painful click. She realizes he is seeing her clearly for the first time, seeing the strength she tried so hard to hide behind soft laughter and politeness. And as Madame Ovia lowers her head, unable to defend herself any longer, the last defense in the room falls apart, leaving only truth behind, raw and undeniable. Kala rises so quietly that the room barely notices at first. Her chair slides back with a soft sound, and she smooths her dress like she's simply preparing to step into fresh air, not stepping out of the storm the family created around her. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't look angry. She only says, in a tired but steady way, that she came to Murebo hoping to build a family, not fight one. The words sink into the room with a strange calm, leaving several relatives staring at their hands. Madame Ovia doesn't lift her eyes. Darren watches her as if he's afraid she might vanish before he can breathe again. Kala turns and walks out through the open doors, and the sunlight greets her like someone who has been waiting outside the whole time. It warms her face, softens her shoulders, and for the first time since she arrived, she feels her lungs fill all the way. She hears footsteps behind her, faster than before, and Darren rushes out, calling her name with a sincerity she hasn't heard from him in years. His voice shakes a little as he apologizes, not with excuses but with honesty. He tells her he should have protected her, that he should have listened, that he should have stood beside her long before the will revealed the truth. Kala closes her eyes for a moment and lets the breeze brush against her. She feels sorrow for what she lived through, and relief that the truth finally spoke for her in a way she never could. She knows she didn't take anything from this family. She didn't force her way into their story. She was already part of it, long before they realized. When she steps off the estate path, she does it with steady steps, not because she's being pushed out, but because she finally understands the worth she carried into Murebo all along.